or Lutherans or Methodists or Calvinists or Calvary Chapel people or any of the assorted groups within what we think of today as Protestantism. None of them existed, but guess what? The Catholic Church certainly did. So you've got the Catholic
Continue
Church
on Whitney Portal Road for
translating the Holy Bible
3/4 of a
into
mile.
Icelandic and Swedish in the 13th century. In addition to European languages, the Bible was also being translated by the Catholic Church into Arabic, Syriac, Ethiopian, Armenian, Chinese, and Hindi, all the way over in India, long before and even during the time that the Protestant Reformation was taking place. A common assertion is that there were no Bibles in English until John Wycliffe, who was touted by many Protestants as being the morning star of the Reformation, came along in 1382. Remember that name, John Wycliffe. In fact, there's an organization called the Wycliffe Bible Translators. It's a Protestant organization. They do very good work. And the project is to translate the Holy Bible into obscure languages, and some that are not so obscure, in parts of the world that have only recently been evangelized. So in the jungles of Burma, there's a dialect, for example, that is not necessarily the national language, but the Wycliffe Bible translators, they undertake to learn the language and then translate the Bible into that language. It's a very good thing to do. But it's mistaken to think that John Wycliffe, who by the year 1382 was in full swing, he, by the way, was a Catholic priest. He was an Oxford philosopher and theologian, but he got in trouble with the Catholic Church. And he
head west on Whitney Portal Road toward Horseshoe Meadows Road.
The morning star of the Reformation.
Continue on Whitney Portal Road for 8 miles.
Years, 150 years before the onset of the Protestant Reformation, and he was translating the Bible into English. But St. Thomas More, who lived from 1478 to 1535, he was the Lord Chancellor of England. He was also a martyr under King Henry VIII. He said, Wycliffe, whereas the whole Bible was long before his days by virtuous and well-learned men translated into the English tongue, and by good and godly people with devotion and soberness well and reverently read, took upon him a malicious purpose to translate it anew. Now what he's referring to is, he's saying that Wycliffe, he translated the Bible into English, purporting that his was the first translation into English. And St. Thomas More was saying, no, it had been translated in English many times over, long before John Wycliffe. The 1408 Council of Oxford explained why illicit translations were condemned by the Church. It's dangerous, as St. Jerome declared, to translate the text of the Holy Bible out of one idiom into another, since it's not easy in translating to preserve exactly the same meaning in all things. We therefore command and ordain, and henceforth no one translate any passage of Holy Scripture into English or any other language in a book or booklet or tract of this kind lately made in the time of the said John Wycliffe. This is Thomas More speaking. Or that hereafter may be made either in part or wholly, either publicly or privately, under pain of excommunication, until such translation shall have been approved and allowed by the diocesan bishop of the place, or if need be, by the provincial council. Let's pause there for a second. Why would they say that? Why would they, being the ecclesiastical authorities in general, and St. Thomas More in particular as the Lord Chancellor of England, why would they say that? Why would they say no more translations of the Bible into English? Here's why. Because in some instances the translations were tendentious, and what that means in this context is they wanted the reader to interpret the Bible in a particular way that in some cases was contrary to its correct meaning. I'll give you an example. Jehovah's Witnesses, the people who go door to door in neighborhoods and they pass out Watchtower and Awake magazines. Sometimes they stand in front of some grocery stores or other places of business where people walk by and they want to give them their literature. Among other problems with Jehovah's Witness teaching, they deny the divinity of Christ, they deny the Trinity, and they have other aspects of their belief that are incompatible with Christianity. But one of their big problems stems from the translation of the Bible that they use. We could put the word translation in quotation marks. It's known as the New World Translation of the Bible. They themselves made this version. And I'll give you an example of tendentious translating. In John's Gospel, chapter 1, verse 1, it says, this is the correct version. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then if you look at verse 14, it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Who is that referring to? Obviously, Jesus. So the correct translation in English from the Greek is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, what the Jehovah's Witness version of the Bible does, in order to support their view, is they mistranslate the Greek from that passage, and they use the indefinite article, which does appear in the Greek, but is not supposed to appear in English because it's not correctly translated into English that way. So their version says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. Meaning, or suggesting, that the Word that became flesh and dwelt among us, Jesus Christ, he was just a God. He was like a godlike creature, but he wasn't true God. You can see that type of defective, erroneous, and I would argue it's obviously intentional and deceptive, because the average person doesn't know even a spattering of Greek, so he would not realize if the Jehovah's Witness is quoting from his Bible, the New World Translation, and he says, look, it says right here, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. That means that Jesus wasn't really God by nature, they'll tell you. So here we have an example in the New World Translation of something that's injurious to the faith. It leads people astray. It's not the Bible's fault, it's the translator's fault. And that's what St. Thomas More and popes after him were reacting to, saying that if somebody comes along with a Bible translation that has not been approved by the church, then stay away from it. Not because the church doesn't want you to read the Bible, but because the church doesn't want you to be led astray by reading a defective and tendentious version of the Bible. That's the key to understanding this. Ask any Calvary Chapel person or someone from the Good Book Baptist Church, would you use, in your theological studies, would you use a Jehovah's Witness Bible, a New World Translation? They'd say absolutely not. And it's not that they're telling themselves, I don't want to read the Bible. They're saying, I don't want to read that Bible, because that Bible has defects and is problematic. Let's continue. In 1844, now I've got here, this is actually a quote from an Australian scholar. His name is Father Paul Stenhouse. And he wrote a really great booklet called Catholic Answers to Bible Christians. He says, St. Thomas More says that the Church, far from forbidding translation, simply believed that the standards of translation should be strict. Quality control is taken for granted in all aspects of daily life these days. The Church still expects that sacred scripture should be given at least the same respect that we pay the food we eat, the homes we inhabit, and the cars we drive. In 1844, the Reverend S.R. Maitland, librarian to the Archbishop of Canterbury, this would be the Anglican Archbishop, published a book entitled The Dark Ages, in which he demolished, one should have thought forever, the myth that no Catholic in pre-Reformation England ever knew his Bible well. None of the facts collected by Maitland, a non-Catholic historian, supports the claims that many Protestants make. Thus, in 705, the year 705, St. Adhelm is reported to have bought a Bible from a ship that entered Dover Harbor and presented it to the Abbey of Malmesbury. King Offa, king of the Mercians, presented a Bible to the church at Worcester in the year 780. Paul, abbot of St. Albans, in 1077, presented two Bibles, adorned with gold and silver and precious stones, to the church there. And he goes on to give a long list of examples of this, where the Bibles were in free circulation throughout England, well over 5 centuries before Martin Luther. Maitland says that in the course of his research, he came across not a single instance in which the Bible was treated disrespectfully by Catholics. And by the way, that's because everybody at that time was Catholic. And no instance of its being kept from the people. Nor did he discover any hint that the Bible was regarded simply as a valuable piece of furniture, hardly used at all, or simply only used by the monks themselves. Many of the Bibles to which Maitland refers would have been in Latin, but the author makes frequent references to copies in Anglo-Saxon. The Catholic Church is frequently accused of keeping the Bible in Latin, so the common man couldn't understand it, and that's not true for the reasons that I just mentioned. Now, often, there are some points that can elude our attention. The first is